Okay. Okay, good evening and welcome to Understanding the Racial Wealth Gap Simulation. This is being co-sponsored by Christ Church Fort Lauderdale's Anti-Racism Task Force and the League of Women Voters of Broward County. My name is Monica Elliott and I am the president of the Broward League. For those of you who are not League members, I just want to say a few words. The League was formed on February 14th, 1920. So we are almost 102 years old. And we were formed just before women obtained the right to vote. We are a nonpartisan political organization, and that means that we never support or oppose a candidate or a party. However, we do advocate on issues that League members have voted to support or oppose at the local, state, and national level. And now I will introduce Pastor Brett Opolinski with the Christ Church.
So good evening, everyone. As Monica said, my name is Brett. I'm one of the pastors at Christ Church United Methodist, and it's a joy to welcome you to this tonight. I am so thankful to see everyone here. And just wanted to share with you just briefly the work of the Anti-Racism Task Force at Christ Church. We really have three basic goals. One is we try to become and remain educated about issues related to race in our community and in the larger world. We try to intentionally practice beloved community. And then the third is we try to be prepared to respond to issues around race within our local community and in the larger context. And we see this as really important work. That's an important part of our faith journey. And so it's just a good thing for us to share this work with you, and we are grateful. I do want to let you know real quick before I do the opening, a quick opening prayer is coming up on February 16th. We have been reading for this quarter, we've been reading together the book Devil in the Grove by Gilbert King, a very powerful book about our own state of Florida and the history of racism here within our own state. And we're really excited. On February 16th, we're gonna have the author Gilbert King joining us for a book discussion on Zoom. So we'd love to have you join us for that. You can find out more information as we get closer. You can visit the Christ Church webpage, christchurchfl.org, and sign up for the link there as well. But as we get started tonight, I want to just be brief so that we can get started with this program. Would you join me in just a quick word of prayer? Oh God, put your justice in our hearts so that this world may look more like your kingdom, where every person is valued, where we live out and see one another in the ways that you see us. So pour your justice into our hearts. In your name we pray, in your name we begin tonight, oh God. Amen. And at this point, I would like to introduce to you Susan Sprague, who is the chair of our Anti-Racism Task Force at Christ Church United Methodist.
Welcome, everyone, even if you're not named Florence at the moment. It's my privilege to introduce you to Florence. Florence French Fagan has been the Florida state organizer with Bread for the World for 5 years. Florence builds coalition and community-based partnerships. She empowers communities to understand why disparities exist within communities and mobilizes them to take action at the state and federal levels by advocating for just legislation. So please join me in welcoming Florence.
Hello, everyone. This is such a large group. These are the kinds of groups where I wish we could be in person so I could look at everyone in their eyes and welcome you, but I can't. So I hope you can see my face and my expression, and I welcome you. I thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and if someone can give me a thumbs up that you can see the PowerPoint, excellent. All righty. So similar to the League, Bread for the World is a nonpartisan organization And we are a faith-based organization as well. And I just noticed something. I'm sorry. Give me 1 minute. I think I may be using the wrong PowerPoint. Give me 1 second. No, it's the right one.
It was the right one.
Okay, sorry about that. All righty. So before we start tonight's experience together, I want to remind everyone that what you're going to experience is not a game, especially when we do this in person, where you have money and land and lost opportunity in your hands. People can think that they're sitting down and they're playing a Monopoly game. But what you're going to be learning about tonight are policies that have created what we call the wealth gap in this country. And obviously, millions of people have been impacted by these policies who are living in hunger and poverty. So Bread for the World was established about 45 years ago, and we have one sole mission: to end hunger. But when we're talking about ending hunger, we're not talking about programs and policies. These things, we're not talking about programs. These things are really important, especially during COVID-19. But what we're talking about when we say we want to end hunger is we want to address the root causes of hunger and support policy that is going to help us achieve that goal. So through these policies today, you are going to see some of these root causes. So what you're looking at on your screen is the difference between equality and equity. In the top picture, you see that everyone has a bicycle, but not everyone is able to ride the bicycle or to ride it comfortably. The picture on the bottom depicts what equity is. Not only does everyone have a bicycle, but everyone is able to ride it and ride it comfortably. So when we're talking about equitable policies, we are talking about addressing issues that one group of people has been experiencing over a long period of time and having to do different things so that there is an equitable outcome. So if you have the ability to establish programs or policies, we're asking you to do what's called looking through a racial equity lens. There are 4 forms of racism that we talk about in this simulation. The first one is internalized racism. This lies within all of us. It's how we were raised. Some people might call it unconscious bias. Interpersonal racism is how that manifests itself when we are in how we treat one another, especially people who are different from us. Institutional racism is within all of our systems of power. So these policies that you're going to be looking at, mass incarceration, education, banking, land ownership, these are the foundational systems of our country. And all of these systems have been built on racist policies. Structural racism is that bias within those institutions and across our society. Now, it's important when we're talking about racism to also talk about historical trauma. You know, what has this done to people over time? And I'm going to share a video with you. It's only about 5 minutes long that addresses historical trauma, specifically for African Americans.
What matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it.
My dad said when they were growing up, they said, we used to play cowboys and Indians. And he started telling me this story. And we used to fight over, nobody wanted to be the Indian. And he said, I didn't think about that. We'd all play, and I'd always suck it up, and I'd be the Indian. But how ironic is it for a bunch of Indian children to be playing cowboys and Indians, and nobody wants to be the Indian? The introduction of a destruction of culture and loss of what is good. And I asked my dad, well, why didn't anybody want to be the Indian? And I thought I knew the answer. He said, because everybody knows the Indian dies. And that already in his generation, as strong as he was, he received a message as a young child. I received the same message, that it was not good to be Indian.
Slavery, colonization, forced relocation, and other historically traumatic events in generations past have lingering and profound consequences today. But what is historical trauma?
Historical trauma has to do with collective, cumulative emotional wounding over and across generations that results from massive cataclysmic events. These are events that don't just target an individual, but they target a whole collective community. Things like forced relocation from traditional homelands, like the Trail of Tears, like my ancestors went through. But the process that our communities talk a lot about is that the trauma is held personally, and it can be transmitted over generations. So even family members who have not had a direct experience of the trauma itself can feel the effects of that event generations later.
Does historical trauma only affect certain groups of people?
What really helps me to help people understand the notion of historical trauma is that it's actually a phenomenon that lots of communities, indigenous communities, or people all over the world have sort of kind of struggled with. It's not something that specifically is only owned by tribal people or indigenous people. It gets articulated all over the world.
Historical trauma is widespread, affecting many communities across the globe.
Observation has, from the empirical side, started with work on the Holocaust survivors. And there's a lot of work on intergenerational transmission of trauma. And it's moved into also looking at Japanese internment survivors, Armenian survivors, descendants of their Holocaust, and so forth. So there's been some more empirical work in this area. And you can imagine trying to track trauma over generations and trying to tease out what is the impact over generations on this child, combined with whatever traumatic events they've gone through in their childhood and in their lifetime.
Historical trauma is passed on across generations.
I say to you, acknowledgement is due my grandfather, Pop. He never told us the stories of why he did certain things. He never shared with us why he never cried, for example. He never shared with us why he walked out the door when my grandmother cried. Why he turned his back when she cried. Of course we thought he turned his back because he didn't care, of course. But he turned his back, as I look back now, because the pain has no words. I still have the images of him dealing with the limitations that he was up against. I can only imagine the pain. But what I do know is that it didn't go away. It came inside into those of us who followed him.
No one ever talks about the moment you found out that you were white, or the moment you found out that you were black. That's a profound revelation. The minute you find that out, something happens. You have to renegotiate everything, and that's a profound psychological moment.
I saw a water fountain that said white in color. My family was 7 kids by then. We drank a lot of Kool-Aid. So colored water, that was in my cognitive schema. So I go toward this colored water fountain. And while I'm there, just before I get there, there's a little white girl who saw that same colored water fountain, and she was just about to turn the sprocket when her mother came and grabbed her by the arm. And she said, "You cannot drink from that colored water fountain." And she said, "But I want the colored water! I want the colored water! Oh, I want the colored water!" So I knew it must be good. So I run to the colored water fountain, looking for my mom, making sure she won't stop me from drinking. And I turned the water fountain, and it was clear, just like at home. That day, that trauma, I remember to this moment.
For African American communities, historical identity and understanding is inextricably tied to the reality of enslavement.
It ties us to enslavement with what an awful terror, 400 years of trauma we experienced. And for us, we talk about it as being utter cultural erasure.
All righty. So the reason that we show that is because we want to We want to affirm that as you go through this experience, it will make you sad. It will make you angry. It will make you feel a lot of things, which is perfectly normal. And all of those things are okay. So we just want to affirm that. Let me start sharing my PowerPoint again. All righty, so let us talk about the scope of hunger before COVID-19. More than 35.2 million people living in the United States were facing hunger, and over 34 million people were living below the poverty line. Half of American households could lose everything if they just missed one paycheck or got sick. At the height of COVID-19, more than 40% of people living in the US faced hunger, and hunger increased by 3 times because of COVID-19. Over 17% of people in the US were living below the poverty line, and almost 85% of households who lost a paycheck experienced hunger for the first time. Specifically here in Broward County, the latest statistics from September 2021 from Feeding South Florida show that 220,000 people in the county face food instability. 67,000 of them are children. That's 1 out of 8 adults and 1 out of 6 children. In Broward County schools, 41.6% of students are eligible for free and reduced meal programs. So as you go through this, I want you to keep this in mind. Bread for the World has been focused on federal policies. So we've been very busy during COVID-19. At the height of COVID-19, we were advocating for an increase in SNAP. We were advocating for pandemic EBT because children couldn't go to school. And when you're talking about almost 50% of your population in the county not having access to food because they're not at school, pandemic EBT was a lifesaver for those families because they were given monies on a card so that they can just go shopping at the grocery store. So before the pandemic, people of color were more likely to face all 3 of these things: hunger, live below the federal poverty line, and be just 1 paycheck away from becoming poor. During the pandemic, Black, Latino, and Indigenous households have become 3 times as likely to experience these realities than their white counterparts. The Federal Reserve banks, all 12 of them, embarked on this webinar series. It's been almost 2 years now, at least 1.5 years, where they look at racism's impact in all areas, in education, in who becomes an economist, in home ownership. Like, there's not one system that they have not looked at. But the starting point for them was that if this is not addressed from a systemic perspective, it is going to impact our GDP. That's the bottom line. When we think about what wealth is and what it does, wealth is the ability to accumulate savings. Wealth is the ability to pass on your wealth to your family. So whether that's in monies or land ownership, wealth is the ability to go to college, to get a good education. Wealth is the ability to shop online for your groceries. The difference between wealth and not wealth is shopping online for groceries and those frontline workers who cannot miss a paycheck, because otherwise they will be homeless. So wealth gives us the ability to insulate ourselves from hunger and from poverty. So remember, Bread for the World's sole mission is to end hunger and poverty. but it has nothing to do with food at all. It has nothing to do with a scarcity of food. We have an abundance of food, but it has to do with these root causes of hunger. So what we hope you gain from this experience tonight is a really good understanding of what racial equity is and why it's important that we address it from a structural point of view. We hope that you feel more comfortable talking about it. There's a lot of white noise going on right now when people are talking about systemic racism or critical race theory. It comes down to history, right? What you're going to be looking at are federal policies. So there is no dispute. These things actually happened. So this gives you the ability to articulate what systemic racism is, because it has nothing to do with people and everything to do with policy. Most importantly, we hope that if you are in a position to either implement programs or policies, that you would use this new racial equity lens that you have. I'm going to pause for a moment here, and we're going to be given instructions on how the breakout rooms are going to work.
Okay, thank you, Florence. This is Monica Elliott again. So if you're not familiar with breakout rooms, I'll show you in just a moment how we do that. But you're going to be going into the various rooms based on your last name. So there's 10 rooms over here that we show with the alphabet from A to Z. We have a separate 3 rooms for those of you with faith-based groups. Anybody can join either group. We just want you to know that when we get to the second breakout room, there is a question for discussion that is directly related to faith. Next slide. So to join a breakout room, if you're using your laptop, usually in the lower right-hand corner, you will be able to find this little box with 4 squares in it. If you're using like an iPad, it's often maybe on the side, or it might be on the left side, right side. Sometimes you might even see it at the top, but that's what you're going to be looking for, is this box that's got 4 little squares. And then when we activate the breakout rooms, you're going to see the rooms listed and you'll see the alphabet. And again, you'll just click on join, and it'll ask you yes or no to join. You click on yes. And again, we're going to separate out based on your last name. So thank you.
You are welcome. And I just remembered that I did not launch the poll. So let's do that now. Let me stop sharing my screen for a second there first. Okay. I'm going to launch this poll. And if you could please answer the questions that you see on your screen. And while you're doing that, if you have not renamed yourself already, if your name is Florence French and you are not Florence French, please be sure to rename yourself.
I'm sorry, but I don't see the 4 boxes to be able to go into a breakout room.
We haven't launched the breakout rooms yet.
Oh, okay.
Right now, you should see a poll on your screen. We'll give it another 30 seconds for you to answer the poll.
Can you put the poll back up? I don't see it now. I saw it earlier, but I didn't click on the answer.
You probably minimized it.
No,
Poll goes away once you submit.
Right.
Okay, I see. All righty, that's okay. You'll have another chance at the end of the simulation. All righty. So here, let me share the results on the screen. So 9% of people think racial equity is equal opportunity. 9% think racial equity is everyone having a fair chance. 27% of you think that racial equity is investing additional resources when needed. And 68% think that it is all of the above. All righty, let me go back to my PowerPoint. Welcome. If you are just joining us, please remember to rename yourself if you came in as Florence French. And here we go. So for the purpose of tonight's experience, if you are a Black person in real life, I would like you to take on the role of a white participant. If you are a white person in real life, I would like you to take on the role of a Black participant. And if you are neither of the above, you have the option to be either a white participant or a Black participant. There are what we call action cards in this simulation. We will have people reading each policy. At the end of each policy, based on whether you are a white participant or a Black participant, you will take an action. You will have the opportunity to lose or gain money, to lose or gain opportunity, and to lose or gain opportunity, period. So remember, you're going to take an action based on whether you are a Black participant or a white participant. We're going to keep a tally on the screen for you. If you want to keep a tally yourself, wherever you are, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil. All righty, let's begin.
Policy number 1, Andrew Johnson's land policies and sharecropping. After the Civil War, only 30,000 African Americans owned small plots of land, compared to 4 million who did not, because an 1865 federal law rescinded the government's promise of 40 acres of land for former slaves. These 4 million Blacks largely resorted to renting the farmland of their previous master in exchange for a share of their crop. This system of sharecropping tied farmers to their former master because they were legally obligated to buy all farming materials, usually at higher prices, and sell their farming crops solely to their former master, usually at lower prices.
If you all have ever seen a Spike Lee movie, you know his tagline is 40 acres and a mule. This is where he gets this from, rooted in history. So if you are a Black participant, you will add 1 land card and 1 money card to represent the less than 1% of African Americans who were able to own land and not face debt after being enslaved. Unfortunately, Black participants should also add 4 lost opportunity cards for the 4 million African Americans who had to sharecrop and were denied the initial promise of land ownership. Buying farm supplies from the landowner at higher prices, only to sell their crops back at lower prices, resulted in African Americans facing higher levels of debt and higher rates of food insecurity. So after policy number 1, we see that Black participants have gained 1 money card, 1 land card, and 4 lost opportunity cards.
Policy number 2, land seizures. From 1865 on, Blacks could have their land seized to pay sharecropping debts, or simply because white landowners declared that Black farmers or businesses were in debt. Blacks could not fight these charges because they were legally prohibited from suing whites in court. In addition, from 1949 to 1970, 1 million people lost their land to abuses of the power of eminent domain, which allows local governments to seize private property. About 70% of these families were African American.
If you are a white participant, you will add 1 land card and 2 money cards for having the legal ability to seize the land of Black farmers and business owners, increasing your income and reducing your vulnerability to hunger. If you are a Black participant, you will subtract the land card for the land lost under land seizures. You will also subtract a money card for the tens of millions of dollars lost from no longer having land to help earn an income and grow food to eat. So after policy number 2, Black participants have lost their money card and lost their land card, and white participants have gained a land card and 2 money cards. So taking a look specifically at Broward County. I'm sorry, I have this thing that is in my way. Okay, there we go. So the earliest settlers to Broward County migrated from Georgia, South Carolina, and the Bahamas. Many of them were railroad workers, and they helped to build a rail extension from the north in 1896. They usually lived along the railroad tracks in some shanties. After the tracks and the stations were completed, they stayed there. At the time, Fort Lauderdale was incorporated and had in 1911 and had a population of 150 people. In the 1920s, there is a community called Liberia that was created for the Bahamian and African American workers when Hollywood, Florida was being developed. Some of those homes were constructed in Bahamian style and some of them still remain. By 1940, Fort Lauderdale had a population of 18,000. The suburban cities which surround this area today hadn't been formed. Some of the residents have lived there for generations. Some have extended families in the Seminole Indian community. I know that there are many people joining us tonight that are not necessarily from Broward County. So at the end of our time together, you will have my contact information, so you can reach out to me if you want specific information for whatever region you're from.
Policy number 3, the National Housing Act of 1934, Part 1. Policies under this law guarantee federally backed loans to whites and legally refuse loans to Blacks and to anyone else who chose to live in or near Black neighborhoods. This practice, known as redlining, targeted entire Black neighborhoods and identified them as grade D. This made it nearly impossible for appraisers in the private sector to do businesses in Black neighborhoods because of all the residents were considered bad credit risk.
Redlining is something that happened all over the country for those of you who have never heard of it before. And those same neighborhoods that are redlined now are going to be the same neighborhoods where you have the highest rates of poverty, almost in any city that you go to in the country. If you are a white participant, you will add 1 land card and 1 money card for the equity gained in purchasing homes not near Black neighborhoods. Equity increased a family's ability to save for future needs and to build wealth. If you are a Black participant, do not add any land cards because of the inability to purchase homes. Do not add any money cards since it was illegal to lend to Blacks, preventing them from building equity and weakening their ability to save for future needs. So after this policy, we see that white participants have gained additional money. So again, taking a look at Broward County, in 1922, Fort Lauderdale passed their first ordinance with a color line restricting Black residents. This restriction was west of the Florida East Coast Railway tracks. There was a gentleman named Dr. James Sistrunk, one of the country's earliest African-American physicians, who moved to Fort Lauderdale. And that area today is called Sistrunk after Dr. James Sistrunk. In 1959, when Fidel Castro ascended to power, the city of Miami accepted white-only Cubans to come to the Miami area. which forced the African Americans that were living in Miami in the Overtown area to move to Broward County. It attracted large number of defense contracts as well, and I-95 was built. Around 1960, the greater Fort Lauderdale business community targeted Anglo-Americans and Europeans for winter retreats and retirement homes. At the same time, the Black community organized a wade-in in Fort Lauderdale Beach to protest the lack of access to the colored beach. The links at the bottom of this page will provide you more information about this history.
Policy number 4, the National Housing Act of 1934, Part 2. Since this legislation prevented Blacks from receiving federally backed home mortgages, whites usually purchased homes in Black neighborhoods and then sold housing contracts to Blacks who wanted to become homeowners, often for 2 or 3 times the amount of the mortgage. These contracts only guarantee Black families the rights to the mortgage. These contracts only guarantee Black families the rights to the house after all the payments were complete. Missing even one payment or being late would result in the Black family losing their home immediately.
If you are a white participant, you will add 2 land cards for being able to legally purchase homes at the market rate and add 2 money cards for the equity earned from home ownership. Black participants will add 1 land card for signing a contract for a home in hopes of becoming a homeowner one day. Do not add any money cards because contracts stripped additional income and wealth from several generations. Also add 1 lost opportunity card because of the higher interest paid and less equity earned once the home was actually purchased. So after policy number 4, we see that Black participants and white participants are gaining and losing wealth almost at the same rate.
I think you're going to read policy number 5 through 8.
So I shall. Policy number 5, the Social Security Act. This act excluded farm workers and domestic workers who were predominantly Black from receiving old age and unemployment insurance. Although Social Security was meant to help those affected by the Great Depression, and African Americans were twice as likely as the average American family to face hunger during this time, 65% of African Americans were ineligible to receive Social Security.
So this is from 1935. It would take 30 years for this law to be amended so that everyone has access to Social Security benefits. If you are a white participant, you will add 1 money card for being able to benefit from unemployment and old age insurance during a very grim time in American history. If you are a Black participant, you will add 1 lost opportunity card for the inability to benefit from unemployment insurance, even though African Americans were between 2 and 3 times as likely as whites to experience poverty and hunger. So you'll see that that number keeps popping up, twice as much, 3 times as much, as far as African Americans experiencing hunger and poverty. So this is not something that is new. It's not happening now. It's been happening for generations.
Policy number 6, Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. This was enacted to help bolster the economy and to get the country out of the Great Depression, but it excluded tip-based jobs and other jobs predominantly held by Black workers, including servers, shoe shiners, domestic workers, and Pullman porters from this first ever minimum wage legislation. Even though the Black unemployment, hunger, and poverty rates were at least twice those of whites during the Great Depression, the very policies meant to alleviate economic strain were withheld from the Black community.
If you are a white participant, you will add one money card for benefiting from the minimum wage to make their families less susceptible to hunger and poverty. If you are a Black participant, add one lost opportunity card for being stuck in tip-based occupations that did not offer a minimum wage to help families survive during the Great Depression. This made it even harder for them to get back on their feet and build for the future. So after policy number 6, white participants have gained additional money, Black participants have gained lost opportunity. So what you're looking at now is a map that was created by the National Housing Coalition, I believe it was last year. There is nowhere in the country where if you are making a minimum wage, you can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Forget about home ownership, just a 2-bedroom apartment. There is nowhere in the country. So when we are talking about one of the root causes of hunger, it's obviously a lack of a living wage, not just a minimum wage, but a living wage.
Policy number 7, the GI Bill of 1944. This was enacted to help World War II veterans adjust to civilian life by providing low-cost home mortgages, low-interest business loans, tuition assistance, and unemployment insurance. Unfortunately, Black veterans were excluded from many of these benefits.
If you are a white participant, you will add 2 money cards and 1 land card for the opportunities you receive, such as government guaranteed housing loans, which help to build the American middle class. Black participants, only 1 Black participant adds a money card, representing the few African Americans who had access to some benefits of the GI Bill. All Black participants add 1 lost money card for not being able to benefit from the GI Bill, even though they too had fought for the United States in World War II. Often the question that I get asked when we get to the GI Bill is, why couldn't they access the GI Bill? And it's simply because it was not enforced. If there were soldiers who went to apply for it, they would just be denied and there was no recourse for them. Every group at the time benefited from the GI Bill. White Americans, First Americans, Mexican Americans, Japanese Americans, and Chinese Americans. Black Americans were the only ones who did not benefit from the GI Bill. If you think about what this current administration is trying to do with the Build Back Better plan, it's what was done in 1944. In the Build Back Better plan, they are trying to address inequities that have existed for years, right? Looking through that racial equity lens. So they're looking at childcare to allow people to be able to go to work, to provide healthcare coverage, additional healthcare coverage. The child tax credit was lifting 50% of children out of poverty from the time that families were receiving it until July to the time that it ended in December, simply because families were using that money for food, because you're talking about food insecure households. So we are, so this is a map showing home ownership for African Americans. I want you to look at those percentages, okay? This is a map showing home ownership for white families. It is almost double the percentages of African Americans, almost everywhere in the country. So we're going to pause for our first break. It's going to be about 5 or 6 minutes long. And we just want you to just talk about these two questions. How do you see these things playing out in your community today so far? And where do you think these types of conversations are important to have? Where power lies in education. All righty, I hope you all had good discussions. We will have one more breakout at the end of the last policy, and that one will be longer. Let me start sharing my screen again. All righty, let us continue with policy number 8.
Policy number 8, overturn of separate but equal doctrine from 1954 to present day. Although the separate but equal doctrine was declared unconstitutional in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education, American schools are more racially segregated today than at any other time in the past 4 decades. Academic success is less likely in predominantly low-income Black neighborhoods. Black students are 5 times as likely to live in an area of concentrated poverty with underfunded, understaffed, and overcrowded schools. This leaves Black students with limited education, and many often settle for minimum wage jobs that offer little hope of advancement or better pay.
If you are a white participant, you will add 2 money cards for having up to $733 higher annual per student spending on education than Black students. This contributes to a greater likelihood of attending college and later getting a higher paying job. If you are a Black participant, you will add only 1 money card to represent the 75% high school graduation rate among African American students compared to 88% among white students. You will also add 1 lost opportunity card for the lower student spending that helps funnel many Black students into low-wage work after high school. So specifically here in Florida, if you are a Black student, you're more likely attending a school with families that come from lower incomes. And if you're a white student, you're more likely to attend a school with families that are considered middle class. And remember, we talked about racial equity, right? Looking through that racial equity lens through policy. In the first CARES Act, there was $301 billion that was set aside for schools to respond to COVID-19. Unfortunately, half of that money went to charter and private schools. So the very schools who really could have benefited from it did not get it. And then taking a look at Broward County in particular, the first school for African-American children opened up in 1906. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and it was located at Northwest 3rd Avenue and Broward Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. In 1924, the founders of Fort Lauderdale, the family name was the Stranahans, sold land on Northwest 4th Avenue to build a school for African-American students for $1. This would become what is now known as the Old Dillard School. Dr. Judith, you're muted.
Policy number 9, subprime loans from 1970s to present day. Starting in the 1970s and continuing today, the private sector issued a subprime loans with higher interest rates to Black families almost exclusively, regardless of a family's income, education, or good credit history. As a result, Blacks continue to unfairly pay more for homes of the same values as their white counterparts. This increases foreclosures rates among Blacks, which also contributes to higher food insecurity level.
If you're a white participant, you will add 2 land cards and 2 money cards for securing good interest rates on homes. If you are a Black participant, Blacks were forced into subprime mortgages as their only option for more than 3 generations, stripping income and wealth from the Black community. High-income Blacks were 80% more likely to lose their homes than high-income whites when the housing bubble burst in 2008, and 240,000 Blacks lost their homes. Therefore, Black participants will add 1 land card and 1 money card. I was one of those 240,000 people that lost their home during this time period. I was living in Virginia at the time, and I moved to Florida to take care of my father. I put my house up for sale, and I rented it in the meantime. I lived in a beautiful townhouse in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County, one of the best school systems in the country, public school system, 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And I moved to Florida without a job because I had never had a hard time finding a job before. What I didn't know was I would get caught in the housing bubble. I went through all of my 401k and all of my savings trying to pay for my home in Virginia and my rent here in Florida without a job. So after 6 months, I lost my home to foreclosure. It would take me 10 years to build up my credit and to become a homeowner again here in Florida. But when that happened, I paid a higher interest rate, not for any reason, because my credit was repaired at that point, except that we were discriminated against. In December of last year, we finally were able to refinance at a lower interest rate. So I know that my story is not typical, right? When people lose that much, they don't ever get it back. I got it back because I come from a middle-class family that was able to support me and sustain me until I got back on my feet again.
Policy number 10, the war on drugs, 1971 to present day. The war on drugs, initiated in 1971 and continuing today, widened the racial wealth gap with policies targeting Black and Brown communities. Although rates of using and selling drugs are comparable across racial lines, Blacks are up to 10 times as likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and or incarcerated for drug violations as whites. Since this means that Black families are up to 10 times as likely to have a family member sent to prison, they are more than 10 times as likely to fall into hunger because of incarceration.
White participants will subtract 2 money cards for the more than $180 billion in tax dollars that it costs to maintain mass incarceration today. Also add 1 lost opportunity card, since these taxpayer dollars could instead be used to support programs that end hunger and poverty in the United States. Black participants, combined debt and property depreciation increase hunger and poverty rates within the Black community. Subtract 2 money cards for being more likely to be incarcerated than whites and owning debts of about $13,000 per household in fees and court costs when a family member is incarcerated. Subtract 1 land card for the estimated $11 billion in lower property values in many African-American communities caused by those returning from prison. So you will notice that as a white participant, this will be the only time that you lose money and gain lost opportunity. But Black participants also lose money. So nobody wins in this war on drugs. $180 billion is what it costs just to maintain our incarceration system. Many people are incarcerated for minor infractions. Many people are not able to pay the court fees and the fines that come with going to jail. So when they come out, they stay in this vicious cycle. So when we're talking about root causes, our mass incarceration system is one of those root causes of hunger and poverty. And it doesn't just impact the individual, obviously, it impacts the entire family.
Policy number 11, life after incarceration, consequences of the war on drugs, present day. When people are released from jail or prison, they are hoping for a second chance, but they face more than 48,000 separate restrictions known as collateral consequences. Some examples of lifelong penalties include being denied the right to vote in some states, being prohibited from applying to higher paying jobs, being ineligible to participate in social safety net programs such as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly food stamps, and other restrictions, such as being banned from getting a barber's license. Since Blacks are up to 10 times as likely as whites to be stopped, arrested, and sentenced, they are also up to 10 times as likely to face these restrictions.
If you are a Black participant, there are 5 times as many Blacks as whites returning home with criminal records. Add 2 lost opportunity cards to represent how Black communities are more likely to fall into hunger because so many returnees are unable to reintegrate into society, get a job, and or access SNAP benefits. I'm sure that everybody here knows FRRC. They are the organization that got Amendment 4 on the ballot 2 or 3 years ago now to give ex-felons the ability to vote. And then what the state of Florida did was virtually implement a poll tax. And they said, that's fine, but you can't vote until you pay your fees and fines. So they put up another roadblock. So FRRC started another campaign to raise funds to pay those fees and fines, as well as providing legal counsel to those returning citizens that were trying to restore their voting rights. Now FRRC is working on banning the box on an application. So again, for a minor infraction, you don't have to fill that in because that is a barrier to returning citizens getting back on their feet. Now, Bread for the World normally focuses on federal legislation, but for the first time, we have partnered with Florida Impact, Florida Policy Institute, and some other local organizations and churches to introduce a state bill that would make SNAP available to ex-felon with a drug trafficking charge. Right now, there is a lifetime ban. If you were caught with a joint, it's considered drug trafficking, you never qualify for food stamps. And again, this is something that impacts not only that individual, but their family. If that individual goes back to the household that is receiving SNAP, they will lose their SNAP benefits if that person is living in their household. So this is a direct step that you all can take and support this state bill. It's being sponsored by Representative Alupis out of Miami. So again, looking at the CARES Act from last year, it was not equitable at all. If you were an ex-felon who was out of jail and you had started your own business because you couldn't find employment, if it had not been at least 5 years since you were out and a business owner, you did not qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program. So many of those businesses were not able to make it through COVID. And again, looking specifically at Broward County, African Americans in the county are arrested for violating marijuana possession at 4 times the rate of whites, even though the rate of use is the same.
Policy number 12, employment discrimination, present day. Although racial discrimination in the workforce was legally abolished in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, racial discrimination continues among all educational levels and job sectors. For example, Blacks are twice as likely not to be called back after they complete job applications or interviews. In addition, the gap between the hourly pay of Blacks and whites has gone from $3.55 an hour in 1979 to $6.73 an hour in 2016.
If you are a white participant, you will add 2 money cards for being twice as likely to receive a call back for a job and for earning an average of $14,000 a year more than your Black peers. If you are a Black participant, you will add 2 lost opportunity cards for being 2 times less likely to receive a job call back and for earning an average of $14,000 a year less than your white peers. Doing the math shows that racial discrimination in the workforce costs Black workers at least $600,000 over the course of their working years. When I moved from Virginia to Florida, after I got a job after those 6 months, I found a job doing the same thing that I was doing in Virginia, but literally my salary was cut by 50%. But I had the same expenses. It has taken me 14 years to get back to where I was in Virginia.
Policy number 13, the voting restrictions, 1890 to present day. Voting is key to ending hunger. As early as 1890, Blacks faced organized campaigns to prevent them from voting, including bias, literacy tests, poll taxes, and lynching. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act passed, making efforts to prevent voting illegal. Today, people returning from jail or prison who are disproportionately Black are denied the right to vote in many states. In addition, as recently as 2017, states have proposed voter ID laws which would require voters to have government-issued identification. It is more difficult for African Americans to obtain these. 1 in 4 face barriers, compared with 1 in 10 whites. Barriers include, for example, having to pay up to $150 for an acceptable copy of a birth certificate and social security card, travel costs, and time taken off from work.
Black participants will add 1 lost opportunity card for 1, being prevented from voting in the early 1900s when the votes of Black people might have prevented some of the harmful laws mentioned in this simulation from being enacted, and 2, still facing voting restrictions that disproportionately impact Black communities and weaken efforts to improve policies that end hunger and poverty. So we all know what's happening right now with voting laws throughout the country. Florida passed theirs in May of last year. And you can see all the states here that have some form of bill that they have introduced to suppress the vote, basically. So what you're looking at now is something that was created by a friend of mine, Miriam Mengesti. She is the missions director at United Methodist Church out in Orlando, Florida. She wanted to look at all of the policies at once on this timeline, and she wanted to see which of these policies are still impacting us today. So that when she's having conversations with people who say things like, why are we still talking about these things? They were so long ago. It's in the past. Why can't we move on? Or for people who say, well, why can't they just lift themselves up by their bootstraps? This is a visual that shows how almost every single policy still impacts us today. From land ownership to voting restrictions and everything in between. The GI Bill was a critical time in American history. That was where the middle class was built. That was an opportunity for us to get it right. And I believe that here, right now in 2021 is another time for us, 2022, sorry, to try to right the ship. So if you are a Black participant, you have 13 lost opportunity cards, 2 land cards, and only one person would have a money card. Because if we were doing this in person, when we got to the policy for the GI Bill, only one Black participant in each group would have gotten a money card. If you're a white participant, it's the reverse. You have 14 money cards, 7 land cards, and 1 lost opportunity card. Now, a lot of research and data went into creating this simulation. So in real-time dollars, using data from 2013, the racial wealth gap is 13-1. So for every 141,000 a white household had, a Black household had 11. Now, for those of you who may be asking yourself, well, what about white families who are living in poverty? Because it's not only Black people who are living in poverty. In that scenario, the gap is even wider. For every $18,000 a white household has, a Black household has 0. And this is why the Federal Reserve Bank is talking about how systemic racism is impacting all areas of our economy. I heard this quote recently, someone who was arguing about why people are concerned about teaching critical race theory. What we just went through is just real history, and that's what critical race theory is. It is talking about the history that is not currently in our history books, so that children are being taught real American history. So I'm going to stop sharing again.
A lot of league members on here.
Yes, hi.
Okay, Florence, I think we're ready to go again.
Okay. All righty. So thank you again for coming back. And again, thank you for being here. So each of you had a facilitator in your room. So if we can just have facilitators, maybe in the chat box, let us know that you're ready to share out instead of trying to remember what room you were in. So let's start with whoever would like to volunteer to start us off. Share what, in about a minute, what you guys talked about.
Okay,
I can
Linda
do that.
Bloomfield.
Yeah, we were in AB and I was there with Pat Bentley, who is an instructor at Broward College, and a young lady named Jihan, and I won't even attempt to debauch her last name. She's up in Palm Beach County. And mostly we felt that, first of all, the chart or the graphic with tracking all of the policies from the beginning of the country was really helped us focus on how Black people have had little to no chance from the beginning of this country. And Jihan is a woman of color, and she confirmed that the biggest problem in her perception was inaccessibility to opportunity, inaccessibility to education, all the things that we white folks seem to take for granted for the most part, that have allowed us to succeed at a higher level. And Pat mentioned that she sees a lot of her Black students struggling more than the white students, and but succeeding better too, working harder and succeeding better. So that's kind of the opportunity that's presenting itself. But in the end, small as our group was, you know, I think the bottom line is it's never been fair, and it's still not fair, and not talking about it isn't going to change it.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I'm glad that one of the League's areas of focus is education, because that's important. It all starts with education. Thank you for that. How about Margaret? Margaret McGrath?
Yep. So I'll skip over to the, well, what do we think is happening? And the group really talked about how deeply entrenched some of this racial bias is, and that some of it is an institutional issue, and that as people try to work toward resolving it, there's been a lot of backlash, especially in recent years. We talked about the struggle to have the powerful relinquish power, and then we talked about whether that does any good, whether maybe what we should do is make the powerless a little bit more powerful, so that they can start to address the inequalities, because it's not going to be easy to get the powerful to relinquish. We talked about there needing to be interaction and respect and contact between people with different socioeconomic and, you know, other differences, so that we can honor each other and talk about different things, because really these days we're in too many silos. That's
I'm so
it.
glad you said that, because that was one of our goals, right? To give you the ability to have these difficult conversations, to make you feel a little like it's possible, right? You have some substantial information to hold on to. Thank you so much. How about Bonnie Gross?
Okay, I'm sorry. Took me a while to unmute. Yeah, I was with several individuals in group 10, and we started out talking about how we feel we have a lot to catch up. We have a lot of ground to catch up, that we need to do more. And you start with like, oh my gosh, what can we do? You know, what can one do? We all felt like we did learn a great deal from this experience, and that it was a very powerful experience. And where else could this kind of activity take place? And one of the things that we talked about was how did Christ Church end up doing this? Because this is awesome, and would be a great thing for other faith communities to do this kind of program, because this is a place where these conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable can take place. Venice White, who works with Florida Health, the Florida Health Department, is doing a program like this with her organization. And we had an interesting discussion about, given that it's a state agency, you know, is there a certain chilling effect in the climate today about, can you really talk about this stuff in a state agency? And she says, yes, they maybe have to watch a couple of words here and be careful with some of it, but she has plans to do that. And we talked about how this is the kind of thing that you could do with book clubs and have these conversations, or home buyer workshops in real estate area, maybe not the whole presentation, but some of that historic context as to the challenges in the home ownership. So I think that was.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you for that. You know, one of the things that I want to point out when people say, well, what can we do? What's happening? It just seems like there's just so much to do. Having people of color and having people with differing points of view in positions of power is huge, right? Because then the conversation exists. There's more of a chance that the conversation exists. Thereby, there's more of a chance of solutions coming to reality. And I don't know if it was you, if it was the person before you that talked about having people who typically don't have their voices heard. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and that idea of having people with lived experience at the table is so, so important. And that's happening all over the country as well, right? Because it's not that people don't have a voice, it's that people need to be given the opportunity to use that voice. And again, it starts with education so that when they're using their voice and speaking to those people who are in positions of power, they've got some concrete information to share with them. Thank you so much, Bonnie. How about Faith?
I think it's Patty Goff.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says Faith Room 1. Patty, yes.
That would be me. We talked about the trends and that it just seemed to us that no matter how many laws were passed, things never really are getting any better. And then we talked about what are effective ways to educate others and to have conversations. And like the last group mentioned, you know, having presentations like this was very educational. But we also talked about how you can, in your just regular conversations with people, not let things pass. When someone says something that you need to, you know, speak up and say, no, let's talk about that. And even if you can't do it right away, to, you know, go back to it with the person and say, you know, let's talk about this, to raise awareness just in your sphere of influence. And then our last question was on faith and what the faith community can do. And our basis is, you know, we should love God and love our neighbor. And so that's everybody, but we also spoke that God is a God of justice, and he wants to right the wrongs that are out there. And what can we do to be part of groups who are already out there working to right the wrongs? That we want to be part of those groups, but we also need to step out in faith and to speak with others, and not, you know, to pray about it and not be afraid to, you know, to speak to others when we see injustices going on.
Thank you so much, Patty. You know, as I mentioned, Bread for the World is a faith-based organization, and that is the thing that makes us different from other groups when they are going to talk to their member of Congress or to their senator. We do speak from a place of faith. We are not afraid to say that God calls us to love one another. God calls us to treat one another in kind. And then we are able to have the conversation about legislation now, but it is rooted in our faith. So thank you for sharing that. How about Joan in breakout room number 8?
Hi, everybody. Or I'll keep my comments brief because I know you have a lot of groups to get to, but one of the most important things that we talked about, I think, is how we had the Jim Crow laws may not be legal anymore today, but they're still around subterraneously, and we are still having to fight those. There's a hidden agenda in some of the laws, and we have seen them coming out of Tallahassee, the voting laws. It was hard for us to believe that they were actually coming out in this day and age. One of the most interesting things for me, somebody said, I think it was Miranda, but I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, said she wondered how this kind of racism, how does society benefit from that? It doesn't. And she used an expression, the rising tide lifts all boats.
So it's in our best interests to lift each other up and fight and talk about these things, and especially educate through seminars like this.
Thank you for that. You know, at every period of time in history, I mean, African Americans have always been resisting, right? There's always been a fight. But at every point in history where we made real progress as far as legislation, it is because people got together, right? And that's what you're talking about. We have got to work together because in the end, if one suffers, we all suffer. How about Darlene?
I don't think she had a group.
Okay. How about Margie?
Yeah, Margie would be next.
All right, so our first question was about how we saw the racial wealth and income divides play out in our communities. And we all agreed that we could easily see the divides in our own communities, especially, for example, in the church where there was a feeding ministry, people of color were disproportionately represented there. Or if there was at Christmas time, a toy distribution for low-income children, those were mainly Black children that were there. For example, in Coral Springs, the low-income areas that have federally subsidized housing, it's all people of color living there. If you look at the schools, for example, the demographics in schools, in the wealthier areas, they're all very heavily, disproportionately white schools, and those schools have many more resources sometimes than the schools in lower income areas. The next question we had was, what surprised us most? The loss of opportunities, land, or money. And we all agreed that we weren't really surprised by any particular one, but mainly the aggregate effect of all of these losses and how much of an imbalance there is. And as those numbers kept piling up, those loss of opportunity cards kept piling up, it was kind of like really upsetting and overwhelming that how come everybody doesn't understand this historical problem and how it just built and built and how systemic it was. And one of our group, Ken, read the book, The Color of Money. And he said that book revealed many of the same things we learned about here today. And then the last one was about the power of legislation and so forth. And so we talked about how it really truly is policy driven, and all those bad federal policies that you talked about, how eventually when they passed Brown versus the Board of Education and so forth, and these federal policies were changed, then the state seemed to take over and pass the reverse again, setting us back again into this inequitable state. And then one of our members pointed out that it was interesting that the majority of the attendees here tonight are mainly women, and the legislators are mainly men. And is that really the problem?
Thank you so much, Margie. How about Sandra Diaz?
Okay, so our group felt like this was a very powerful program, and seeing all the discrimination on that timeline, even if you knew about one or another thing, to see the whole breadth of it was just a lot. And that, like, we really do wish that this presentation could be seen by everybody. And it was a little overwhelming, and we kind of had the feeling that things haven't really changed since the end of slavery. It's just evolved into different ways of trying to do the same thing. And, we talked about how in Florida, every time we have a step forward, like these citizens initiatives, for Amendment 4, then they try to take it away from us with the poll tax. Or we have the minimum wage, and then they try to say, well, you know what, the former felons don't need to get paid minimum wage. I mean, every single thing we try to do, they try to take it back. And what can we do about that? We talked about with the issue, seemed to get much worse and much more violent after Obama was elected. And that there seemed to be perhaps in some whites this fear that the basic fear might go all the way down to an existential fear of, when we become a minority country, are the minorities going to treat, now that they're the majorities, are they going to treat us like the minority? Are they going to treat the white people in the same bad way that the minorities have been treated? If that made any sense, because of the way I said it might have not been that clear. But we ended up more hopeful in the sense that we know that everybody just really wants the same things, a good education, opportunity, clean environment, and that we need to just stick with trying to get out the vote and focusing on the things that bring us all together. And we touched on the idea of whether reparations might be something to consider, but we didn't really have a chance to get into it.
Wow, thank you. Great discussion. There was actually a bill that passed the House last year to at least have the discussion on reparations. Where it is at right now, I don't know. But at least there is a bill to talk about what reparations could look like. How about Denise Elliott?
Thank you. Our group talked about a lot of different issues, but they all seemed related. Based on the information that we had on Broward County in the presentation, we talked about things that were going on in other parts of the state, because our group had more than just Broward County. And it turned out they're pretty similar almost everywhere. Unfortunately, we heard from Bay County all the way up in the Panhandle to Orlando to the Space Coast. So things are not too different in any part of the state. Then we talked about what kind of change could we possibly show at the ballot box. The thing that was brought up the most was that the politicians tend to show up in the minority communities only just when it's time to vote. And they have a lot of great ideas, but they don't actually have any action going on. And so will be difficult to encourage minorities voters to turn out unless they can trust the politicians. And quite honestly, that's not too different from the way white voters feel as well. Everybody wants to trust them and nobody does. Then we also talked about the fact that part of the problem is there's not accountability. That's from both in the national level, the state level, the county level, all the way down to the local level. There doesn't seem to be accountability for the politicians to live up to their commitments. And consequently, we don't see a lot of positive change going on, unfortunately. So we need to call them accountable. And it's a matter of, again, within the group, everybody had a different part that may have been important to them, part of a different policy impacting how they felt, but the aggregate was really the thing that made the most difference in your mind, is to see the whole thing.
One of the things that I'd like you all to think about is joining our effort to mobilize with us, right? There is power in numbers. We speak with our congresspersons all the time and our senators for what we're advocating for, like the League does. And there are clear holes in the states where we don't have enough of a voice. It's going to be up north. It's going to be on the West Coast. So if you feel moved by this experience, this is a clear step that you can take We'll inform you on the policies that we're supporting and all the things that you need to know. Okay, how about Marcus?
Okay, I was blessed with a wonderful group of all females. I don't know how I got to be the facilitator. I'm probably the lightweight in the group, but and I'm sure I won't summarize as eloquently as they said, but in essence, I think we all learned quite a bit. We were appalled at some of the statistics that came about through the presentation, but everyone, I feel like, learns a lot from that. And one of our members said that perhaps the most important thing is to bring greater awareness to these facts and this racial gap situation, hunger, all this stuff. It's you hear it periodically, but I don't think it's in a format sort of like this that you can digest and is manageable. So that's one of the things that I felt came from our group. The other, we had several that are proactive. One lady in particular is Carrie, made our group aware of some entities like, let's say, Bread for the World, like the DART network that does this type of work. So just me learning about that, and I guess making the group here now aware of that type of thing, to me is a major push or sort of a major message that came from our crew. The last thing I guess had to do, there was another that Carrie also mentioned. There's a curriculum called, I think I'm getting this right, Nuns on the Bus. And again, I don't know anything about it. Some that are more privy to this, that is helpful to me. I would think that's helpful to others. By and large, I think our message was what essentially what Florence had said, that the people getting together and the power in the numbers is major. And my personal push is that we can do this type of thing more often, have venues like this more often. And I was so happy to see we had one member from Hillsborough County that we're spread out, but it doesn't mean you can't continue doing this type of thing virtually from wherever. We've had in our anti-racism thing, which I want to plug again from the Christ Church program, we've had non-members from Maryland and various places. So if we welcome any and all that are still on the call to join us at any of our meetings, and I would love to be knowledgeable of similar ones like this in the future.
Thank you so much. I don't see anyone else in the chat box. Is there anyone that we've missed that would like to report out from your discussion?
I see Andrea Sleeper's got her hand up.
Yeah, we had a small group, and I think most of the people were not from Broward County. We also had one from Miami-Dade, one from Pensacola, one from Collier County. One of the questions was, what did you learn that you didn't know before? And as other people have said, the timeline that you put on over history and the statistics that you brought out, it just brought home how systemic in nature the disenfranchisement has been over time. Also, Florence, we were very appreciative of you giving your own personal history of your struggles, moving from, Virginia to Florida, and the economic problems that you had. It really added, to your presentation. Also, what trends did we see in this simulation? Oh, okay, just discuss that. Okay, so what did you feel are the most effective ways to educate others and have conversations regarding the racial wealth gap? Yeah, we were discussing this because most of the people said that they never discussed this. One gentleman said that he's in an area that is surrounded by white supremacists. So he wouldn't even dare to have the conversation with them because, you know, the divisiveness in this country is so rampant at this point, you know, he's afraid. We also got on the subject of affordable housing. One woman, I think her name was Shirley, she came from Pensacola, and she was talking about how hard it is to get affordable housing in Pensacola. And it seems to be pervasive all throughout Florida, where Florida, you know, in Broward County, you know, we're finding that too. It's hard for affordable housing. It's hard for middle-class people to get affordable housing. You know, I just can't imagine how it is for people who are at the poverty line or below poverty. It's, you know, it just blows my mind. But, you know, the statistics that you brought out really brought home to everybody. You know, just, you know, what can we do? But we're trying to decide, like, how do we have these conversations with people? You know, where? Because we're just not having them. And like I said, one woman did mention church, but like, where else? Where else would you have these conversations in your community?
I can give you some, thank you. I'm sorry, Andrew, were you done?
It's just, you know, and these are uncomfortable conversations. But, you know, when you're in your, like, because a lot of these communities are segregated. You know, you have your areas where whites live, you have your areas where black people live, you know, so where is the common ground that you're going to meet and talk about it? You know, because maybe then we could get some laws passed, because it's getting worse in Florida. We're going backwards, you know, we're going, you know, and like what Sandy was saying, we discussed this also, every time you think that you're given some crumbs by the government, it's taken away, you know, time and time again. So.
You know, one of the things that you said about the cost of housing, and, you know, it's getting to the point where nobody can afford it. The middle class is dwindling. That's a perfect example of how we are all in this together. While these policies have impacted African Americans disproportionately, in the end, everyone is going to be impacted. You know, the idea that such a small percentage of people hold all the wealth as being something new is false. This was set up in the 1400s, right? That always existed, and it's just growing as the population grows. Race is not real. Race is made up. Race was created so that a small percentage of people could hold all the wealth and have all of the power. And they created this buffer between the very wealthy and the very poor. And that buffer were Black people. So white people who didn't have much felt, well, at least if I'm white, I have something, right? So that mentality has moved from generation to generation. And that is what white supremacy or white privilege is. It's all an illusion. Everything is all an illusion. Is there anyone else that did not have a chance?
Carol Smith has her hand raised.
Okay. I do, and so I'll just start talking. Maybe I'll go through. We had a very small group. It was group 4, but I think we came up with some, what we might say at the end. We agree with what everyone else has said, but would add that we need to connect with each other. We need to share, ask questions, develop empathy. And we even had someone mention the need for reparations, that maybe that needs to be brought back again. But bottom line, since we have leaders here, educate and voting, if we're going to do anything with changing the policies or bringing them forward, we need to elect people who share, who understand, who have the historical knowledge of what's been going on, and that we can go forward from there. So thank you. It was really a great program.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up and I don't see another group in the chat.
All righty. I just want to share a couple of things with you. Everyone will receive the recording from tonight, as well as the PowerPoint and what's called our policy packet. So the 13, hi Juanita, I just saw you down there in the corner of my screen. I have a policy packet that I will send to you. So the policy packet will go deeper into the policies that we discussed, so you can understand how we arrived at the data and all of the nooks and crannies of it. There's also a biblical guide for those of you who are people of faith. And if you would like to bring this to your church or to a group and you want to do it from a faith perspective, we can share that with you as well. I heard some mention of Broward College, I think. Maybe there was a professor here from Broward College. We have a very robust college initiative. And when we say college initiative, we are talking young people, young being like 18 to 35, right? Civic engagement is not what it used to be. Our young people are not learning the importance of civic engagement. So if you work with that demographic, please reach out to me and they can be a part of the things that we are doing, and we can walk alongside them too. If you're familiar with the Farm Bill is going to be reauthorized next year. So we are starting consultations now, talking to people about what they know about the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is this huge thing. SNAP is part of the Farm Bill. But what do they really know? What's in there and what groups are left out of the Farm Bill? So young people are a perfect example. If they're going to college, they don't qualify for SNAP, right? Because there's a work requirement right now. So we need to change that. Ex-felons, again, they need to be, they need to have access. So we want to have those conversations and hear from people to know what is important to them. And then lastly, Bread for the World. And Juanita has been with Bread for the World for decades. She started as a youth. One of the major mobilizing tools that we have is what's called our offering of letters. So instead of asking people to donate money, we ask you to write letters to your members of Congress and to your senators around a specific issue. It is proven that if a member gets 10 letters about an issue, unique letters, not a generic letter that's computer generated, but a unique letter around an issue, they are more likely to pay attention to it. And then of course, there are opportunities to meet with your member of Congress. We have lobby days in June where we go to DC. This will be the first time since COVID that we're going to be doing that in person, God willing. And then we have meetings in district as well with our members of Congress. So there is a cycle of advocacy that we follow all year long, right? Because change doesn't come overnight. Change is something that you have to keep fighting for. So those are just some of the things I wanted to share with you. And again, when I send the follow-up email, I'll give you some additional information and resources. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Monica.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Florence. The comments that I'm seeing in the chat, and this has just been fantastic. We knew it was going to be eye-opening because Susan and I had seen it with the Seminole County League. But seeing again, it's like you pick up on something new every time you see this. So, be sure that you do review the presentation again, because I can assure you, there are so many things, there's so many things in this presentation that are really difficult as a white person to comprehend. And so please review it again. So thank you everyone for sticking with us. This is just amazing.
I'm gonna launch the poll one more time. I forgot. Let's see how answers change this time. I want to relaunch. Okay, here we go. Wow, it's changed by quite a bit. That's interesting. Well done, well done.
Do we get an A?
You do. Thank you so much for taking.
Can you share that with us?
I can. Let me capture it and then I'll share it with you all. All righty, I've downloaded the results, so that'll be one more thing that I include in the email to you all. So you'll have lots of resources. And I hope I hear from you all. Stay in touch with me, get involved, and let's end hunger together.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you.
And now we can.
Have a great night.
Program.
Bye-bye. And thank
Bye, everyone.
Also, yeah, I'm not proposing high doses, but not higher doses.